To Texas now, where polls are revealing a tight Senate race between Republican incumbent Ted Cruz and Democratic candidate Beto O'Rourke. Cruz has a small lead in the polls, but this race has gained attention for being surprisingly close despite being in a typically red state.
Texas has also been at the center of a national immigration debate as caravans of migrants head towards the U.S.-Mexico border, although we should also point out that they are hundreds of miles away. And if they continue at this rate, they won't even be here until mid-December, if they make it at all. Let's go to Evan Smith. He is the CEO of the Texas Tribune. He is with us now from Austin to talk about all this. Great to have you. So, as you know, a Democrat hasn't been elected in Texas since 1994. What does this close Senate race mean for the traditionally red state?
Well, I don't think any of us in Texas is used to the idea that on Election Day we're talking about a statewide election being in play. Typically, this is essentially a circle the drain moment for all of us in the political journalism business, and then we move on beyond Election Day to other things. And here we are on a day when, by the way, not only the U.S. Senate race is competitive, but many congressional races are more competitive than they typically are. Democrats may pick up anywhere from 2 to 5 congressional seats, depending upon the turnout today. The Texas legislature is going to become a little bit more Democratic. Democrats haven't been in possession of very much good news on Election Day at the State House either for the last couple of decades. So it's an unusual day. I think the political environment nationally tends not to impact Texas. Texas is like one of those old medieval cities with high walls and people up at the top of those walls pouring boiling oil on the invading hordes at election time. We like to keep the rest of the world out. But I think Texas has not been any more susceptible or less susceptible to that than any place else. I think Texas is absolutely feeling the effects of the political environment. And so to get back to the Senate race, what you have here is a political environment that's made it possible for a Democrat to compete in a way that hasn't happened in decades.
You know, what's the feeling, though? Because Beto O'Rourke received a ton of money, but a ton of money from outside of the state. I mean, it's really a national conversation that we're having about how interesting of a candidate he is. But is the same conversation happening in Texas when people are concerned about their border or health care or, you know, what the local issues in Texas?
Let me push back a little bit on the premise and say that more than half of Congressman O'Rourke's money has not come from outside of Texas. It's come from inside of Texas. And in fact, Senator Cruz has received a heck of a lot of money from outside of Texas as well. This is not a case of California and New York and Washington dictating the outcome of this race. This is going to be a Texas Senate race decided by Texans. And while the issues are national, and this is a national race, of course, issues specific to Texas matter. And immigration is one of those issues that has not just come on the radar screen for Texans. We in the University of Texas at Austin poll 4 times a year or 3 times a year the issues that matter most to Texans. And immigration and border security have consistently come up 1 or 2 for the last 9 years. So this is not an issue, whether it's this so-called caravan or any other issue related to immigration. This is not a new thing for Texans. It is only one of a series of issues probably that will ultimately decide this race. And let me say that I think also the Democrats and Republicans are contesting this race differently. The Republicans would like this to be a race about ideology. Senator Cruz's campaign would like this to be a race between Senator Conservative and Congressman Socialist. The Democrats are trying to run this race more about affect and personality and inspiration. They want this to be Congressman Charisma versus Senator Snark. Those are 2 very, very different poles at which the parties are conducting this race. And so really depending upon who you talk to, if you talk to Democrats, what they're inspired by is the way that Congressman O'Rourke carries himself and talks about the country, talks about the Texas, and talks about the future. If you talk to the Cruz people, they want this to be a straight Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal deal, and they're trying to paint Congressman O'Rourke as a traditional Democrat. But the frame of this race is just not the frame of most races conducted of late in Texas.
You could be in the nickname business.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I like Congressman Charisma and Senator Snark. You know. But the danger in that, I think, Evan, is Congressman Charisma is that he turns out to be an empty suit, that he's just a lot of platitudes and idealistic speeches that don't amount to a lot of substance. And of course, the converse is true for Senator Snark, that you hear a lot of people who are supporters of Ted Cruz saying, yeah, I don't really like him that much, but he gets things done for Texans.
Well, at the end of the day, that's exactly right. At the end of the day, the personality contest does not matter. If the person is elected, Democrat or Republican, doesn't accomplish things for the people of the state. And any election in which an incumbent is running against a challenger is ultimately a referendum on the incumbent and what the incumbent has done. Are we better off than we were 6 years ago when we first elected Ted Cruz? We know that Ted Cruz on the ballot today. We know less about the Congressman O'Rourke on the ballot today. And in some respects, people who are voting for Congressman O'Rourke are doing so because they're investing hopes and dreams in a promise of an approach to governance or an approach to being one of 100 senators representing Texas in the United States Senate. They're hoping that he does the things he says. You're absolutely right. He could turn out to be an empty suit, or he could turn out to be a figure whose deeds match his words. It is going to be for the voters of the state today, as it's been during the early vote period, to decide whether the Ted Cruz, who sold himself as a relatively new figure on the scene back in 2011 and 2012, elected in 2012, defeated the incumbent Texas lieutenant governor running for the open Kay Bailey Hutchinson seat. People at that point heard Senator Cruz say, this is what I'm going to do for Texas. And ultimately, they've got to decide today, did he do what he said he was going to do?
Hey, before we let you go, Evan, I just want to get your take on this crowd control exercise that the Border Patrol, that they're doing right in the backyard of O'Rourke in El Paso. What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is to be very cynical about the fact that they thought there was a need to do a crowd control exercise on the hometown of the candidate at the top of the ballot on election. I think we in the press and we not in the press should consider such a thing with a skeptical eye. It feels a little bit like a political stunt. Why on election day? Why in the hometown of the candidate at the top of the ballot? Next, you're going to tell me that there's gambling in Casablanca.
There's gambling here. I'm
shocked.
Has anybody asked them why, Evan?
Well, we actually have a reporter working on this story, as other reporters are working on this story. Look, elections are not for the faint of heart. The politics often can be slash and burn. We say all the time we want more people to participate in our democracy, and then sometimes, not all the time, we take actions that are in conflict with our words. We ought to be enabling everybody in this state and everybody in every state to participate. And these kinds of exercises, which have the effect potentially of deterring people from turning out to vote, I think it's legitimate to ask questions about the timing and about the location. I do not know what happened, but I certainly would want to have those questions answered.
Indeed. Evan Smith, thank you, my friend. That was great. Appreciate it.